think honestly that it's way harder now than it was back then, simply because Kubernetes was a much more primitive system. It didn't have so many components inside. Even one of the most common things that people use today in Kubernetes is a resource type called deployment. And when Kubernetes appeared, there was no deployment. You had only replication controllers. So if you want to deploy a new version of your application, you had to figure out a way to switch traffic between two replication controllers. I think deployments appeared 2 or 3 years later, and they were kind of copy and pasted initially from OpenShift. And what's funny is that OpenShift also appeared more or less like 3, 5, 6 months after Kubernetes. So there was lots of new stuff. Terraform also appeared in 2014 or 2013. So it was like a revolutionary year. So all the things that now define day-to-day work of infrastructure engineers appeared 2013, 2014.
Yeah, very productive year. I remember you've been creating a number of courses, lectures on Kubernetes, explaining to people how to use them. Do you think like they're still relevant, or like it's changed so much throughout the years that you have to relearn everything from scratch?
I think all the content on the first few years of Kubernetes is now obsolete just because they refactored. For example, Docker. Initially, Kubernetes had Docker hard-coded in it. But thanks to Kubernetes, there was the whole discussion about having open container standards appeared because Google depended on Docker to do any changes inside Kubernetes because in the end, it's kind of powered by, it was at the root, there was Docker. And then Red Hat and other companies wanted to contribute, and then Docker company was like, no, we don't want these changes. So thanks to this, Kubernetes changed the way it works, and now it has this container runtime interface that you can basically plug in any container manager, and everything follows open standards. We have the whole course and articles on our website and YouTube channel about this, how it works. Now it's better. Like the content from 2-3 years ago about Kubernetes, I feel it's more or less the same because Kubernetes entered the stage where I think even in the last maybe 4 years, is that it's very stable and the core feature set is there. And even the core features that are enough for most companies, they did not change much in last years. There are more advanced features that would help with, for example, system engineering. It is at this level that it's already like a stable, it's 10 years old technology. So there are no big explosions in the space anymore.
We need to think something too, because when Kubernetes appeared in 2014, because we need to remember more or less the time: 2013 Docker, 2014 Kubernetes, 2011 the first time that a person talked about microservices, 2011 when Jenkins appeared. In this period of time, nobody was working in infra. So there were infra, but there were not this concept of infra. We need to understand that everything was related to the software. So we have a piece of software that we want to execute in some place. So and the concept of what we have today is completely different, because we have teams only dedicated to infra and teams that are only deploying infra and exploiting the infra. And we need to think that before 2011, more or less, something like that, most of the people was working in, not on cloud, was working on prem. So, and then when Kubernetes appeared, as Kirill was telling, it's not something that explode. It's something that it's a tool that could be used, but to be used in the way that it's used today, cloud needs to explode. Microservices need to explode. The pipelines, like for example, what Jenkins was doing, needs to be used for all applications. The people needs to jump from this monolithic to different components, not an only component. And after many years that the people start to think how to change the architecture, and after many people working on that, is when Kubernetes is able to do something, and Kubernetes is what it is today. But again, today there are many places and many cases where Kubernetes is not needed, and many people is still using Kubernetes because people think that is cool. Because these days we have things like, for example, Cloud Run in Google Cloud, Cloud Function, many little places where you can execute only one container or two. That in many cases, we can say even in most of the cases, is everything that you need. So, and there are people who is using Kubernetes only because it's Kubernetes. So at the end, still this is something that we need to think. But it's cool that this kind of components of tools, so these applications are still there, and are improving day by day. And it's interesting to see where is going to be Kubernetes in the next 10 years, in 2034. You don't know. Maybe there is something new, the architecture change, and now Kubernetes is not needed anymore. Or no, it's something that is, because
Mhm.
I cannot imagine Kubernetes with 20 years of history in this world where nothing is with 20 years. Everything is after 5, 6 years disappear. But okay, could be interesting to see what was happening with Kubernetes.
Funny is, I think I'm always irritated that Kubernetes is like a default choice for someone running things in the cloud, because that's also not the benefit of having Kubernetes, because originally Kubernetes is the system that allows you to run workloads on many, many machines, but it was built for a physical world, or let's say for the VMware world. Because what Kubernetes gives you is all the like an easy way to run many, many copies of your applications distributed around a big cluster of machines.
Mhm.
So it kind of makes the capacity management of your existing infrastructure easier, which goes a bit against what cloud providers try to offer you, like AWS, for example, where they try to make more and more services where you don't have servers in the first place. So to me, every time I see Kubernetes in the cloud, especially like in AWS and Google Cloud, I'm thinking like it makes no sense, because cloud providers give you serverless options where you don't need to think about servers, but you somehow want to have still EC2 instances or GKE instances and put on top another layer. So now you have two layers of managing like virtual machines, and then on top you have a layer to manage containers, which in the cloud environment, it's totally unnecessary for most companies, if not all companies. And it's funny because in this time when Kubernetes appeared, 2014, and Docker was like the most popular thing. They already released AWS Lambda, but okay, it took Lambda quite some time as well to become super mature like it is now. And they also released ECS, Elastic Container Service, which is much, much simpler and fits for most companies that want to use AWS. And it's funny and sad to see how ECS kind of lost this battle in the people's mind, because it's something AWS specific and people just want to use Kubernetes because you don't have a vendor lock-in. Even though ECS, if you're using AWS, it's in most cases much better choice to run your containerized workloads. Like on Google Cloud, you can use GK, Google Kubernetes engine, but for most applications like Cloud Run is much simpler and easier to use.